It is so hot in here. I've had to shut the window so I can record, but it's just like 17 times worse. Okay, it's fine. Bones and All is a movie I have talked about extensively on this channel. About a year ago, I released a video praising it as one of my favourite movies, and although the video itself leaves a lot to be desired, I do think I made a pretty sound argument as to why it's one of the films that I deem nearly perfect. At the end of that video, I ran through the book by Camille d'Angelis, which the film is based on. The section was not supposed to be as long as it ended up, but I was caught off guard by how different the book ended up being. Several different plot points, characters, the time period, the ending. I thought it would be really interesting to do a book review that was entirely disconnected from the movie, not comparing it, just looking at it as a piece of standalone media, because I had so many more thoughts than I expected. Of course, it will be hard to look at the book without the lens of the adaptation, but I'm really going to try. Before we start, I do think it's really important to give a general warning that the book does have a couple of instances of attempted sexual assault and a strong theme of predatory men. I can promise there's absolutely nothing graphic, but it sent a shiver down my spine, so proceed with caution or don't proceed at all if that's what you need to do. I am so pleased that I managed to get a physical copy of this book because when I did the film video, I just was reading it off my screen and it's so aesthetically pleasing to be reading the book, and I was able to annotate it. I'm one of those people who is like really touchy about like writing in my books, so getting this book with the express purpose of annotating it meant I just got to like let loose and really have fun with it, so that was like an added bonus. Penny Wilson wanted a baby of her own in the worst way. That's what I figure, because she was only supposed to watch me for an hour and a half, and obviously she loved me a little too much. No matter what else I'm about to say about this book for the next, 2 hours, I will start off by saying how much I love this opener. In fact, I'll preface everything by saying that I don't think Camille d'Angelis is a bad writer. I just think she has made a few odd choices, as you will see. Marin's mum finds her asleep next to the pile of bones and immediately flees the state with Marin. Then Marin tells us about the day after her 16th birthday, the 31st of May, 1998, when her mother finally leaves her. She left a note on the kitchen table, "I'm your mother and I love you, but I can't do this anymore." Trembling, I went back into the kitchen and read the note again. I don't know if you can read between the lines when there's only one sentence, but I could read all the things she hadn't said clearly enough. "I can't protect you anymore, Marin. Not when it's the rest of the world I should be protecting instead." I'll be so honest with you, this first chapter is so good. It doesn't contain any of the things I'm going to have a problem with later. It tells us who Marin is really well, explains her life and the nature of her cannibalism without feeling too much like exposition, even though it is exposition. Her mother also leaves her some money and her birth certificate, and this will be our present day for the first couple of chapters. For the rest of chapter 1, Marin tells us about the second person she ever ate, a boy named Luke, when she was at a summer camp. "Nothing happened for years. I was a model child, quiet and sober and eager to learn, and over time my mother convinced herself I hadn't done that horrible thing. So when I was 8, Mama sent me to summer camp. It was one of those places where the boys and the girls live in cabins on opposite sides of the lake. We sat apart in the dining hall too, and we were hardly ever allowed to play together. One day, Marin decides to swim to the other side of the lake just to say she'd done it, a very 8-year-old thing to do. And in the middle of the lake, she meets a boy called Luke, who must have had the same idea. If this were anyone's story but mine, it would have been the first time I met my childhood sweetheart." Another great quote. They become friends, he slips her notes throughout the next few days, and eventually they meet up in the middle of the night. He takes her into the woods, and she finds that he has set up a little tent with snacks and games for them. He's talking to her about how he wants to be a forest ranger, he wants to do a triathlon, he wants to live in a treehouse. And she is getting more and more uncomfortable because she is starting to feel a feeling that will become incredibly familiar to her. It trickled over me then, making me shudder. The hunger and the certainty. I didn't know anything about Penny Wilson, I just had a feeling I had done something horrible when I was little, and that I was on the verge of repeating it. The next morning, Luke is reported missing. Obviously, the scene of the crime made it very obvious that it was a murder, so all the parents have to come and pick up the kids, including Maren's mother, who immediately knows what has happened. Her mother is planning on them leaving immediately, but Maren gets an ear infection from swimming in the lake, and then she refuses medicine, refuses to drink any water, anything, so she has to get taken to the hospital. She's admitted, and a social worker is called because the state that Maren is in has made the doctors suspicious of how she's being treated at home. Eventually, she gets better, she answers all the social workers' questions, and she is discharged from the hospital. When she gets back to the car, her mother has already packed their life up. Now we've reached chapter 2, and this is where the vibe takes a turn that gives me pause, and the theme begins that will carry us through the rest of the book, but we're not there yet. Maren has never known who her dad is. Her mum would never tell her when she asked, so eventually she just left it alone. So, when her mum leaves her birth certificate, she finally sees her dad's name for the first time, Francis Yearly, and she realises that her mum wants her to take the money and find her father. However, Maren isn't into this plan. She has her grandparents' address on an old postcard and she heads there instead with a plan to make her mum take her back. Maren goes on to talk about what it was like to grow up as a cannibal. Something I find really interesting is her desperate search for representation. Maren doesn't have anyone to talk to about this thing. Her mum's the only one who knows, and she wants to pretend it doesn't happen. So Maren obviously starts to look for comfort and validation in other places, such as books. I only found people like me in storybooks I read in the library. Giants, trolls, witches, ghouls, the Minotaur. If this were a Greek epic, I would be the hero's narrow escape. Kronos, the god of time, was convinced that one of his children would overthrow him, so every time his wife gave birth, he gobbled up the baby. Gobble. That word was the reason I dreaded Thanksgiving. Whenever I was going to school, I spent all my free time in the library. My mother wouldn't buy me the BFG, so I read it during lunch period, but Roald Dahl disappointed me. The heroine never ate anybody, and the nasty man-eating giants all got their comeuppance. What was I expecting? Somebody like me could never be the good one. This is a girl who isn't accepted by her family or the world at large. She's struggling with self-hatred at such a young age, and she's hunting for something, anything that she can relate to. That's just such a familiar feeling. 16-year-old Maren reaches Edgartown and sneaks into a neighbouring garden so she can watch her grandparents through a picture window. She sees them having dinner. Sure enough, her mum is there, but she watches her mum cry and ultimately decides to leave her alone. She has spent all her money on the tickets to Edgartown, so now she's got nowhere to go. All the shops are shut for the night and there's no one around, so eventually she finds an abandoned car and has to sleep there. Maren continues to tell us what it was like for her growing up, and this is where the theme really starts to kick off, because the nature of Maren's power becomes clear. I think before this chapter it's not really laid out clearly. There are hints, but this sentence really solidifies it. On Thursday morning, somebody wandered over to my table and I looked up. It was Stuart, the smart kid. I felt him leaning over my shoulder to see what I was reading. I felt his nearness and smelled the tuna fish on his breath, but he didn't make me feel funny. He was one of those boys who never thought of girls in that way, or at least he wouldn't for a long time yet. The key factor for Maren to eat someone is their attraction to her. I'm sure she didn't figure it out at first, as she was just a little kid the first few times, and those thoughts don't cross your mind. It doesn't apply to the first time with Penny Wilson, as her love for Maren was purely that of a would-be mother and baby. It starts to creep up with Luke, but they were only 8 years old. When you're that young, all you know is that you're especially fond of somebody. It's uncomplicated. Now she's reached the point in her origin story where she's about 12 years old and she's beginning to recognise these feelings for what they are. So, as it becomes clear to her, it becomes clear to us. She says that all of the people she ate throughout her early teens were boys who had befriended her and invited her over to his house to study or etc. At some point I learned the word for this. A pretext. A reason that's really an excuse. We went up to his room. It almost always happened that way. Every time I wanted to say no. I knew it was the right thing to tell him to leave me alone, but he'd already been snubbed by our classmates 100 times over. How could I say no? This is interesting because this is where we start to explore Maren's sense of obligation, which I think is really familiar to people who have experienced being a young girl, a young woman, and it's really interesting when you bring the cannibalism into it. Instead of fearing that she's going to get hurt, She is actually fearing for the lives of these boys, but her fear of hurting their feelings still overpowers that. I have so much more to say on this and the turn it takes later, but we have a little bit more to cover before I can get to it. The last part of her origin story that Maren has for us goes back in time a bit. It's the next one after Luke, so she's about 9 or 10. Maren and her mother have been living in Baltimore for a while, and her mother has a job she's really happy with. She takes Maren to a Christmas party at her boss's house and is basically like, I love this job, I finally have friends, don't mess this up for me, Maren, I swear to God. She leaves Maren in the room where everyone has put their coats and tells her to just read her book for the next 6 hours or however long they're meant to be there. Maren takes a nap under all the coats and is eventually woken up by Jamie, the boss's son. It's very sweet at first, you know, the feeling of being one of the only 2 kids at the grown-up party. Super cute. Jamie asks Maren if she likes stars and invites her to come upstairs and look at his telescope. And of course Maren says yes. You're 10 years old, you want to look at the damn telescope. I don't blame her. Besides, at this point, the pattern in her cannibalism hasn't become clear, or even really started, so to her mind, there's no harm in going up and playing with Jamie. They look at some stars, and then Jamie's mum comes upstairs and finds them. It hadn't felt like we were doing anything wrong, but there was something funny in his mother's voice. Oh, to be a child and realising that friendships with boys are not treated the same as with other girls. Although I say that, but I feel like his mother's reaction is more so implying that maybe Jamie has a bit of a reputation, as he invites Maren down to the basement and basically says, you show me yours, I'll show you mine. It's uncomfortable. They're both 10. Maren is freaked out, and it puts me in mind of how young of an age boys start to sexualise their relationships with girls. It's partly natural development, but we do tend to show them media and model behaviour that starts to steer them that way a lot younger than necessary. Maren refuses to show him anything, and he asks if he can just kiss her. I knew I shouldn't, but I'd already hurt his feelings once. Although she knows that she is putting him in danger, in her 10-year-old mind, that sense of obligation is overpowering. It's such a good metaphor. I wish it was intentional. Obviously she eats Jamie. Rest in peace. And they're in the basement, so she throws her clothes in the washing machine and hides his, and eventually it's time to leave. Jamie's mum is searching for him and they can't find him anywhere, and Maren and her mum are leaving, and Maren's mum just knows. God damn it, Maren. This chapter ends with a short monologue that really wraps it all up. That night I learned there are 2 kinds of hunger. The first I can satisfy with cheeseburgers and chocolate milk, but there's a second part of me, biding its time. It can go on like that for months, maybe even years, but sooner or later I'll give in to it. It's like there's a great big hole inside of me, and once it takes his shape, he's the only thing that can fill it. That's the end of Maren's backstory, and we're with her in the present for the rest of the book. After sleeping in the car overnight, she's wandering around a supermarket and she meets Mrs. Harmon, an elderly lady who offers to pay her a bit of pocket money if she helps her with her shopping, and Maren is like, hell yeah, good deal. They catch the bus, and as it's pulling away from the station, Maren sees a man watching her from across the road. Put a pin in that. They get back to Mrs. Harmon's house, and she makes breakfast. Her house is a classic old woman's house. Gaudy furniture, photos everywhere, quotes on the wall. But it's homely and cosy, and Maren has never been to a house that feels like that before, and she's starting to feel safe again. Mrs. Harmon talks about her late husband and tells Maren that she's 88 and a half years old. After they eat breakfast, she promises to teach Maren how to knit, but she needs a rest first, so Maren goes to her spare room and has a nap as well. When she comes out, Mrs. Harmon has passed away. Peacefully in her sleep, which is a relief because it could be a lot worse. Maren doesn't know what else to do, so she goes back to the spare room and takes another nap out of sadness, and when she wakes up again, the man she saw outside, remember, is eating Mrs. Harmon. This is easily the most graphic scene in the book. Every time someone is about to get eaten, there's like a tasteful cutaway, and it's just implied or described through innuendo. But Maren watching Sully eat Mrs. Harmon is actually described, and I think it works because it's a shock to Maren, so the horror of the scene is nicely conveyed. He introduces himself as Sullivan, Sully for short. This conversation they have is so long. From Marin discovering Sully eating Mrs. Harmon to them saying goodnight is a whole 20 pages. We've somehow been in chapter 3 this whole time. Actually, the whole book is only 12 chapters long, which is so crazy. Sully's shtick is that he has this insatiable appetite, so they're talking while he's making dinner and then dessert, etc, etc. They go through Sully's backstory, they touch on the idea that being an eater is hereditary. He says that he didn't eat a person until he was 10, but before that he always ate random things that weren't food.
I realised I left out a lot of important Scully? Oh, she's always on my mind. I realised I left out a lot of important Sully information, such as the hair rope. He's an old guy, about 60 or 70, and he has this rope of hair that every time he kills a person, he cuts off their hair and braids it into the rope. It doesn't really come back in the story, but I just feel like that's quite important to explain Sully's character. He's like a weird guy, but he puts Marin at ease quite quickly. He's quite nice and easy to talk to, and yeah, she feels quite safe with him in the end.
Marin tells him that she's going to find her dad, and he advises against it and invites her to ride along with him if she wants instead. They say goodnight, and when Marin wakes up, he's gone, but he's left a note for her which says, "Missy, I got a feeling you won't take my advice to heart about not looking for your daddy. But if you change your mind, just come back to town and wait somewhere for me and I'll find you. Life with old Sully is never dully. Sullivan." I love him. I love him. Marin goes to the Greyhound station and catches the next bus, which is going to St. Louis. St. Louis? St. Louis? St. Louis. She starts fantasizing about life when she finds her dad. She's idealizing and she's happy when she gets off the bus, but unfortunately she also realizes that she's only got $15 left. There's no way she's making it to Minnesota on her own. So she turns to hitchhiking and catches a ride with a girl called Samantha, who's heading home from college for the summer. She's nice enough, but when Marin reveals that she only has $15 left, she abandons her in a Walmart car park. There's a theme throughout the book of other girls treating Marin poorly, and in turn she is hostile towards them. She goes into the Walmart and wanders, considers stealing food. There's a guy in one of the aisles drunkenly ranting and raving about his wife. He starts harassing a woman, but he's distracted by a guy who takes the attention off the woman and sort of saves her. This is Lee. She describes him as looking 18, maybe 20, which is yikesish because she is 16 and this is the love interest. Lee tells the guy to come and fight him and leads him off towards the back of the store, and Marin's like, I feel kinship with this boy. Marin ends up stealing a can of chickpeas because she figures stealing something cheaper is less wrong, but she obviously can't eat them, so what's the point, Queen? She's sitting outside of the store lamenting, and one of the workers comes out. His name is Andy, and he's like, I saw you steal that can, by the way. He doesn't turn her in. In fact, he says he'll get her some real food, and they both go back inside. Lee and Marin meet, and it's an incredibly funny kind of meet-cute scenario. I wandered back to the electronics section. It was time for the nightly news, and President Clinton's face was on every television on the wall. They showed a piece of old footage from the whole impeachment thing earlier that year. I did not have sexual relations with that woman, said the president. It's one thing to tell lies, I heard someone beside me say. It's something else to do it on national television. It was the other guy from the candy aisle, the boy in green. What a weird way for them to meet. Andy comes back and takes Marin outside, and they sit in his car, and his true intentions become clear pretty quickly. This is what this scene looks like. Look how much I've annotated. Look how much I've written on it. I was freaking out. It's just... This is the most gratuitous instance of attempted sexual assault. So if you don't want to hear me read these quotes out, skip here. And if you don't want to hear about it at all, skip here. He reached over and took my hand, lacing his fingers through mine and letting them rest on the console between our seats. Can I do this? Is this all right? That's all? I asked. He nodded. For a moment, just one moment, I felt safe. It's okay, he ran his fingers along the bumps on the steering wheel. You don't have to do anything. I don't want to do anything. That's okay, I just want to sit here and hold your hand. You want more than that, though. He shrugged. Every guy wants more than that. Ugh! He talks about how sad his life is and all the bad stuff that's going on with him. And then you show up and I think, yeah, she could understand me. I folded my arms tightly over my chest. You don't know me. Maren does sort of, she stands on business a lot of the time, and I appreciate that about her character. You've listened to me, says Andy. Now let me listen to you. Please, I shook my head, please don't be so nice to me. And I have written, this isn't nice. I reached for the handle and heard the click as he pressed a button and locked all 4 doors. Andy has just lost all sympathy that I could have possibly had for him. She keeps saying that she doesn't want this, she wants to leave. She says, I've done horrible things and if you don't let me leave, I'll end up doing it to you too. But he is not listening, he's not taking no for an answer. He ran his fingers down my leg to my knees and gently pried them apart. So she eats him. Thank you. See, this. I'm getting ahead of myself. Maren feels really guilty for eating Andy. She says, he could have guilt-tripped me. He could have made me do things for him, but he didn't. And I have written, that is what was happening! Girl, please! I need to calm down enough that I can read my script. This scene raises a question about the intentions when writing Maren's character. And this is where we've been building to throughout the first half of the book. The Goodreads blurb for Bones and All states, Maren Yearly doesn't just break hearts, she devours them. The summary on Wikipedia says that Maren generally attacks anyone for whom she has affection, and in one interview, Camille DeAngelis, the author, states that Maren eats anyone who gets too affectionate with her. But upon reading the book, you find that this is wrong. Of course, there are instances that fit with that idea. The first person she ever ate, also the first and only woman we ever see her eat, was Penny the babysitter, who felt deep affection for her. And then Luke, who she clearly felt affection for and was extremely scared of eating. And funnily enough, these two are the only instances that trigger any sort of emotional response within me. Maybe that's cruel. But every other time we see Maren eat somebody, it is a boy who has made her feel uncomfortable, and that makes it hard for me to connect with them. Certainly makes it a bit difficult to feel bad for them. And I feel like affection, affectionate, is odd phrasing because apart from Penny and Luke and maybe Jamie is on such thin ice, every time she eats somebody, it is an instance of attraction, particularly sexual attraction. Camille DeAngelis really backed herself into a corner by choosing to make Maren eat people who are attracted to her, and I will tell you for why. Maren does not want to eat anyone. She says so throughout the entire book. She sees herself as a monster. She almost exclusively refers to the act of eating someone as the bad thing, suggesting that she cannot even bring herself to speak of it. It drove her mother away. It isolated her entire life. Maren does not lean into her urges until the very end of the novel. And from very early on, she is aware of exactly what triggers her. So, throughout the entire rest of the novel, she is wary of men and boys. Not because of what they could do to her, but because of what she knows she's capable of doing to them. She keeps them at arm's length because if they make a move on her, she will end up eating them. So naturally, she is always saying no. No to advances, to invitations, to pretext. So for her to eat anyone in this book, those men and boys have to push her boundaries. For there to be any story at all, they must put her into the position where she eats them because Maren will never do it herself. Andy doesn't know that Maren is protecting him by saying no. He has no idea she's a cannibal who eats boys. Okay, Jennifer's body. All she sees is a woman in his car, telling him to stop and trying to get out. And what's his response? To lock the doors. I cannot feel bad for him when he meets his fate. And I know you're probably thinking, This sounds like it was intentional, and I would think so too. However, it is counterproductive when you discover that Marin is supposed to be a metaphor for the average meat eater. I will explore this further later, but Camille DeAngelis is a passionate vegan, and the point of Bones and All is that flesh is not food. I feel like I'm rediscovering this myself right now. Marin was written to be likeable, a sympathetic main character, someone who you can understand, someone struggling with a problem, but you are also supposed to go away reconsidering your own actions. And this is hard when you can't help but feel as though a lot of these boys are being served some sort of justice. I can't help but wonder, how did she not see it? When she was writing it or when she was revising it, how did she not realise that the subtext is so different from what she seems to have intended? Camille DeAngelis has said in many interviews that she was already partway through writing the book when she realised the vegan message. She was like, oh, how ironic that I'm a vegan and I'm writing this story about cannibals, but she hadn't really given it any weight. I just think she picked the wrong message. Why didn't she reframe it? Either make Marin's trigger something else or, I don't know, lean into it. Realise you've accidentally written a commentary on something entirely different to what you thought. Marin feels so guilty about Andy and she decides to step in front of a truck, but she is saved at the last second by Lee. Together they steal the car of the drunk guy from inside the shop, if you remember him, because of course Marin's intuition was correct and Lee ate him. His name is Barry Cook. They find an electric bill on his dashboard and go to his house to crash for the night. They make small conversation, they have a sense of camaraderie, but they also don't really trust each other yet. Marin correctly deduces that Lee does this a lot, stealing his victims' cars, crashing at their place, and that's basically how he gets by. Barry has a waterbed, interesting, and Lee jumps onto it and says, now all we need is a mirror on the ceiling, and I have dutifully written next to it, hot if she wasn't 16. The next morning, Barry's ex-wife shows up demanding child support. She says she's going to come back with the cops, so they get out of there. They stop at a diner and get breakfast, and Marin catches Lee up on her journey so far, including Mrs. Harmon and Sully, who Lee is pretty sceptical about. And he tells her that he left home when he was 17 and confirms that he is now 19. And she is 16. I'll try not to mention it again, but it's just like, why? They ride around for a while, they camp out in the truck bed, and they're slowly getting to know each other. Cute, cute, cute. They end up in Lee's hometown in Virginia, and they stay at his aunt's house, which is empty. The next morning, Marin meets Lee's little sister Kayla, who is the same age as Marin, and he is teaching her to drive. It's pretty clear that Kayla is the only person he cares about, and the only reason he keeps coming back to his hometown. Kayla hates that Lee doesn't stay in town. She misses him. She doesn't know the real reason he doesn't stay. When Kayla leaves, Lee is already packing to move on again. Marin asks if he can teach her to drive too, and he does. When they're settling down to camp again, Lee notices that Marin has all these books with her and rightly guesses that they aren't all hers. A lot of them belong to the boys she has killed, and she goes through all the mementos she's kept and tells him about each one. Lee then tells her about his first time. It turns out it was the babysitter too, although we learn that his trigger for eating somebody is different to Marin's. He kills in response to anger. The babysitter in question treated him badly. His dad's out of the picture and his mum is a deadbeat, which is supposedly why he left home so young and wouldn't have returned if it wasn't for Kayla. The next night, they're listening to the radio in the truck bed and they tune into this midnight service being broadcast from a church. The Reverend is giving a sermon on forgiveness and Marin is really interested. She finds the idea of this all-encompassing forgiveness really comforting as she is searching for absolution. She starts to picture what the speaker looks like, what the crowd looks like, and it's a really warm piece of writing. I could picture the speaker so clearly, tall and thin with a long nose and a knobby Adam's apple, looking very earnest in a grey suit and a crimson bow tie. He regarded his audience through thick black eyeglasses like men used to wear in the 60s, and he had a little nick of a scar on one brow where his sister's ice skate had sliced him at the age of 6. The audience gave a warm, rumbling reply. Hallelujah, forgiven be forgiven, brother. They'd driven long distances to be there tonight, no matter how many times they'd already seen him. This was one of those churches where people swayed and trembled and called out in praise of the man who died for their sins. Oh! They announced that the next midnight mission will be tomorrow night at 10 p.m, and she even floats the idea of going. Of course, though, Lee is cynical and says there's no place for them in their world, which is probably true, but is not so comforting for Marin. When they go to sleep, Marin has a nightmare where she's in the church, but there is no possibility of forgiveness for her. This was not the framing I had before. It was not. The next afternoon, they've nearly reached Sandhorn, where Marin's dad supposedly is, but Marin doesn't really want to get there just yet, so when they pass a sign for a carnival... They have a wonderful time at the carnival. The last thing they do is go on the Ferris wheel, and as they're looking down over the crowd, Lee spots somebody, and it's Sully! Marin is happy to see him, but Lee is still sceptical of him. Spoilers, but Sully doesn't turn out to be super nice, which is so sad, because some of these moments with him are so sweet. But I guess that's why it works as a plot twist. Sully offers to let them stay at his cabin for the night, promising 2 beds and a home-cooked meal, and after weeks of camping in a truck bed, Marin is dying to accept, and Lee actually says yes as well, although he expresses uncertainty to Marin afterwards regarding Sully's intentions. But Marin is like, whatever. Sully goes back to his truck, and Lee and Marin spot a little boy playing a lucky toss game. He wins, but the girl working the stand refuses to give him the prize, and he gets upset, so obviously Lee, vigilante cannibal, activates like a sleeper agent. Marin says she couldn't have been more than 16, but there was too much experience written on her face. It wasn't the eyeliner. Someone had been very cruel to her, not just once, but over a period of years, and now she was going to pay it forward. So Lee goes and wins 2 E.T. toys and arranges to meet the Lucky Toss girl later because winning the prize for the kid wasn't enough. She has to die. He gives 1 toy to the little boy and 1 to Marin, and then they wait around until 11 o'clock when the carnival shuts. He goes to meet the Lucky Toss girl, whose name turns out to be Lauren. Marin says she had changed out of her red carnival uniform into something 2 sizes too small. I understand that maybe Marin is an unreliable narrator and the way she talks about girls just reflects her own flaws and social upbringing, but it's so... Lee and Lauren disappear off and Marin is watching from the bushes, and it even crosses her mind to watch Lee do the thing, but Sully appears and very kindly says, come away from there, and Marin snaps out of it and they go and wait in his truck. Marin is feeling jealousy and her and Lee have a bit of a spat after he comes back. She knows she's being ridiculous, but she can't help it. She's obviously developed feelings for Lee, and the thought of him engaging with another girl is winding her up. I can't blame her for not being mature about it, because she literally isn't mature. She's 16 years old. How could I be jealous of loathsome Lauren the Lucky Toss girl? Ugh! I wasn't jealous. Not really. I just wanted Lee's attention. If not forever, then at least for the 7.5 minutes it would take for him to polish me off. This book has a talent for losing me with one sentence and then winning me back immediately. The scene at Sully's cabin is pretty short. He makes them dinner and then they go to bed. Lee is still really sceptical of him, doesn't trust him, but Marin is defensive on his behalf. The next morning, they're off to Sandhorn. Marin finds her grandma's name and address in the phone book. Easy as that. She finds her and her grandma immediately knows exactly who she is and invites her inside, although she's really cold to her. It turns out that Frank, Marin's dad, was adopted, so this isn't Marin's biological grandma, but she did raise him. The Yearleys had a son called Tom who passed away, and they adopted Frank as a replacement, which always goes really well. However, the biggest bombshell is that Frank has been institutionalised for some time. Just like that, I lost the way to my castle in the sky. Lee meets Marin at the local library and she fills him in, and he asks if she still wants to see her dad, and she says yes. But she also shows him that she has started writing a letter detailing everyone she ever killed, and she's planning on handing it in to the police. "No way," he said. "You're not seriously going to send this to anyone?" "Why not? Nobody will believe you." I was going to tell him it didn't matter whether or not anyone believed me, but then I thought maybe he wouldn't understand. Instead, I said, maybe they will. They have to go back to Wisconsin where Frank lives, which takes another day. I wanted to Google how long it would actually take them and subsequently discovered that Sandhorn is not a real town. But Minnesota to Wisconsin is nearly 7 hours, so there's your answer. You didn't ask. Lee and Maren have one last night together. They park in a new development and break into a furnished model home. At night, Maren asks Lee if he ever had a girlfriend, and this leads to the real story of why Lee had to leave home. 2 years ago, he had a girlfriend called Rachel, and he took her home to meet Kayla, because he figured Kayla really needed a female friend, which is so sweet. While they were there, his mum's boyfriend came home and set Lee off. Lee told Kayla and Rachel to go into Kayla's room and wait, but Rachel came out and saw Lee eating the guy, and that was pretty much the end of the relationship. Unfortunately, this did lead to Rachel getting sent to a psychiatric hospital. She was screaming about cannibalism, and everyone thought that Lee had hurt her, so he had to go, but no one ever believed her when she tried to tell them what actually happened. The next morning, he takes her to the hospital where her dad lives, and they have a fight and part ways. Ah well. Maren convinces the doctor in charge to let her meet her father, and she agrees with the warning that her father is not well at all. He can't speak or really communicate at all, but his orderly, called Travis, gives Maren a notebook which Frank filled with letters to her. The letter is long. He tells her about his childhood, always being compared to Tom and knowing that Yearlys didn't love him as much. He talks about meeting her mum and about the first time he ate somebody. He ate his kidnapper. As the notebook goes on, the writing gets less coherent until he's just writing her mother's name over and over. It's actually very moving. The big reveal is that he ended up eating one of his own hands, which is actually pretty effective body horror. I feel like just so upset for him. Travis tells Maren that the doctor has phoned CPS and offers for her to come back to his house, and he'll make her dinner and they'll talk about what she should do next if she doesn't want to go into care. So Maren agrees and Travis makes her dinner at his house. They talk a bit. He is mostly nice, but I have a personal problem I have a personal problem with adults in stories being too vulnerable with children. It just makes me uneasy, and in this case it does have a purpose, but it doesn't always. He confesses to Maren that he knows she's a capital E eater just because he knows about Frank and he figured something like that could be genetic. In fact, he suggested this to Frank and Frank got so upset that he ate his hand. So Travis feels guilty about that. Further trauma dumping on the 16-year-old. Basically, in not so many words, Travis explains how he became obsessed with the idea of eaters, started seeking them out, and is now transfixed by the idea of someone eating him. He really, really wants to be eaten. Please, please, please. I was fascinated. Anybody would be. I wanted to know how it was possible for some perfectly normal-looking person, a person like you, to gobble someone up just like you were an ogre in a fairy story. This is just a personal note, and it might just be me, but some of the lines in this book feel so British. I can't picture an American saying, gobble someone up, just like an ogre in a fairy story. But weren't you afraid you'd be... I left the question dangling, and Travis sighed. There was no need to be afraid. For the first time, there was an unpleasant look on his face. Nobody wanted me. Ooh, ooh. I wouldn't call this book horror, and if so, it's definitely on the lighter side. It's YA horror. But I'm telling you, this whole scene with Travis is spooky. The way they dance around the topic, never stating it outright, just the fact it's a pathetic grown man pleading with an uncomfortable girl, it is some really great writing, and it does genuinely make me feel uneasy when I read it. The first time I read this book, I didn't understand what he was asking her to do, but it is obvious on the third go-round. I can't, Travis. I felt myself shuddering, wave after wave after wave. I'm really sorry, but I can't. I can't. I know it's wrong, and I hate myself even more for asking, he whispered, but ever since I met your father and found out who he was, I knew. What do you mean you knew? Please, he said again. It would mean so much to me. This scene ultimately sends Maren back to Sully's cabin because she no longer feels comfortable with Travis. She convinces him to let her leave, and he agrees, but only if she'll let him drive her to the cabin. He has one more go at convincing her before he leaves, and I really enjoy the way Maren sticks to her guns. Before I even knew what I was doing, I yanked my hand away and slapped him hard across the face. I'd never done that to anyone before, and for a second we just stared at each other in shock. "You promised you wouldn't ask me again," I said at last. Travis finally leaves. Thank God. Goodbye. Sully also isn't home, so she's by herself in the cabin. She burns the letter she wrote for the police, officially deciding not to turn herself in. While Maren is poking around the cabin, she finds her father's ID card from when he was a park ranger. What? So this obviously sends her on a spiral of questioning, and of course it's just as Sully is getting back. They have one last nice conversation, and you better savour it because it's never happening again. Maren goes to bed feeling unsafe. That night she dreams of Mrs. Harmon, saying, "He's not a very nice man, is he, dear?" "Mrs. Harmon, there's something I have to tell you. I'm like him." With a deliberate air she laid down the teapot. "No, dear," she said as she laid her hand on mine. "No, you're not." When she wakes up, Sully is sitting in the corner of the room like a freak, and he says, "So you found the ID card, huh?" Why even bother? It is revealed that Sully is Maren's biological paternal grandfather. What? This whole scene is kind of confusing to me. I don't fully understand what's going on, or particularly why Sully wants to kill Maren. I suppose really it's summed up here. I knew you was out there, and if I couldn't get to him, at least I could get to you. So, bish bash bosh. Maren manages to escape by knocking him out with a trophy, and she runs out of the door, leaving her backpack behind. She runs until she finds Travis's car on the side of the road, door open, keys still in the ignition, and it's implied that Sully ate him, so I guess that's a happy ending for Travis. She steals his car, if you remember Lee taught her how to drive, and goes back to his house to have a shower, hunt for money, etc. I don't know why she didn't steal Sully's truck. That would have screwed him over as well as giving her a faster getaway, but that's neither here nor there. Maren ends up going back to Lee's hometown, but she realises she doesn't know his last name, so she goes to the high school and asks for Kayla, and the secretary rings her house phone. Kayla asks if Maren can meet her after her shift at the ice cream parlour, and she does. Maren gives Kayla Travis's car. It's so sweet. "Lee said he wanted you to have a car," I said, "so I want you to have this one. Just get Lee to replace the plates for you the next time he's home." I love Kayla and Maren together. Kayla lets Maren stay with her for the night and then takes her up to the interstate. She gives her food, a new backpack, some clothes, and 2 novels. I could cry. This section is so sweet. It's almost dreamlike, and we are reaching the final act of the novel. I didn't know where I was going, but for the first time in weeks I felt no anxiety. Being with Kayla had made me feel better about a lot of things. If I never saw Lee again, it was all the better for him. Travis had gotten what he'd asked for, and if Sully wanted to finish me off, then let him come. I would be ready. About a month later, Maren has made her way back to Wisconsin. She goes back to the hospital where her dad lives and finds Lee in the car park. I walked up the road to Bridewell, hoping the black truck would be there, but feeling sick with certainty that it wouldn't be. It wasn't there. It wasn't there. And then it was. I found him dangling his legs off the edge of the flatbed, Barry Cook's Stetson shading his eyes from the afternoon sun. I came around the back of the truck, dropped my backpack on the gravel, took one look at him and hid my face in my hands. About a month later, their pickup truck goes bust, so they have to start hitchhiking. They catch a ride with a girl called Carrie Ann, who's heading back to the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She's obviously into Lee and a bitch to Maren, because that's just what other girls in this story are like. "You have a lot of makeup." She laughed. "You say that like it's a bad thing." "I don't know what you need it all for. You're already pretty." She didn't thank me for the compliment. She just kept arranging all her pots and wands and bottles. I watched her, and in my mind I curled my fingers around her nail scissors. Carrie Ann kicks Maren out of the dorm at night, so she ends up having to sleep on a bench. In the morning, Lee finds her, and he has eaten Carrie Ann. They eat people at the drop of a hat, especially Lee, who's like the spokesperson for male short-temperedness. And it's always described in so few words. I feel like the story really suffers because we forget what the real-world ramifications of going around murdering people actually are. I think it's always brushed over because it's supposed to give it a veil of mystery and make us feel uneasy, but it actually feels more like, oh, there goes another one. Anyway, Marin steals Carrie-Anne's identity. She starts spending all her time in the library. She even meets a group of girls who exist in this world and are nice people. She smiled and said, "Do you knit?" I shook my head. I tried to learn, but I just couldn't get the hang of it. "Oh, everybody feels that way in the beginning." The girl leaned over and patted the seat behind her. "Come sit down, and I'll teach you so it sticks." "Ha," said one of her friends. They'd been knitting all through the conversation. "Sticks." The first girl sighed. "Come next week, if you can. Bring your yarn and needles." I nodded and tried to smile as I backed away from the table. I couldn't believe it. They were so nice. I think this is proof that the other girls in the story were meant to represent Marin's outlook more than anything else, so maybe I should apologise to the author and edit out all of the times I slagged off the way women were written. It's still not my favourite. She doesn't see Lee much during the days, and although he sleeps on an air mattress in her room, he's gone when she wakes up. She's not overly bothered about it because for once she's actually got, like, a life. Unfortunately, this book needs its final move, and Marin is in the library one day and finds Mrs. Harmon's cat's tail in her open book. Sully makes his return and attacks her outside of her dorm room. Luckily for Marin, she is saved by Lee, who eats Sully. I could go into more detail, but this script is 7,500 words long. They go through Sully's things, have a look at the hair rope, steal his money, drink his whiskey, and then get into bed. Lee finally admits that he likes her. He implies that he's wanted to be romantical with her for a long time, but he couldn't because he knows that would trigger attraction-based cannibalism. But he finally gives into it because, also heavily implied in the text, he's ready to go. So Marin wakes up with a hangover and -1 Lee. Reader, I ate him. She laments for a while about having eaten him and then carries on with her life. The next day she meets a boy called Jason in the library and they have a little conversation by writing on a piece of paper and passing it back and forth. Marin knows she could be discovered faking someone's identity at any time, but as luck would have it, a student who works in the library offers her a job. She's been shelving books to keep herself busy and he's like, "You may as well be getting paid for this." And then on her way out, she sees a sign for a boarding house, and just like that, she has a job and her own place. She shelves in the library and sits in on lectures sometimes, and she's entertaining Jason whenever they're in the library together. She starts to do this on purpose. She's luring him in. Her switch from guilt-ridden to the succubus that haunts the library kind of comes out of nowhere. After she's eaten Lee, she talks about how he let her do it, so in a way she feels absolved. But I can't tell if this ending makes it seem like she found herself or lost herself. Her self-acceptance makes me happy. I'm just programmed that way as a human, but I don't think it's supposed to because her self-acceptance does mean that she will be murdering a lot more people. Anyway, one day in December, Jason finally makes a real move and she takes him into the back of the library. She's like, "If you don't leave now, I will eat you," and he's like, roleplay. He stepped into me and ran his tongue along the edge of my jaw. "I had no idea you were so twisted." I sighed as I pressed my lips to his neck. Nobody ever does. I have to slow clap for her. I shouldn't, but I must. Directly on the next page is the acknowledgements, which aren't usually covered in book reviews, but it does immediately segue us into the last thing I want to talk about. Acknowledgements. When people who know I'm vegan hear I've written a novel about cannibals, ghouls really, but cannibals is easier, they think it's bizarre, hilarious, or both. The short version is that I believe the world would be a far safer place if we, as individuals and as a society, took a hard, honest look at our practice of flesh eating along with its environmental and spiritual consequences. Cut and dry, clearly stated. Let's talk about it. Not just in the acknowledgements, but Camille DeAngelis has been very outspoken about the message of Bones and All. It's no secret that the core of the story is a commentary on the consumption of flesh. Bones and All is about a girl named Marin who eats, as in gobbles up, like an ogre in a fairy tale. I just have to say, these orange tabs are every time they said the word gobble. There is way too many of them. Anyone who gets too affectionate with her, she stated in 2015 in an interview with Chic Vegan. And in also 2015, in an interview with Responsible Eating and Living, she says, the point of the book is that flesh is not food. It's not. It's not food. A lot of people eat it. It is what we have been indoctrinated to believe is food after thousands of years we've been eating it. That doesn't make it right. That doesn't make it ethical. That doesn't make it fair to the animals and to the planet. I'm so hesitant to criticise her because obviously there's merit in what she's saying. It's like an open secret that the meat industry is so cruel in a way that is so unnecessary. I genuinely respect people who make the decision to cut out animal products and stick to that. People are vegan and vegetarian for a variety of reasons, and I have no place policing the way people decide to live. Unless they're spreading ideas that could hurt people, it is their choice. With that out of the way, in the same interview she goes on to explain, I wrote this book to get people thinking about themselves as predators, because it's not something that you're conscious of as you're just mindlessly ordering your lunch from Chick-fil-A. It was really shocking to me when I first put two and two together in that way. I had already gone vegan and had been vegetarian for many years before that, but that was a real shocking little epiphany for me to have as I was revising the book. But I can't help but think maybe I would be more receptive if the book actually did a good job with the message. That's a shame because there's clearly thought and passion that's gone into the book, but I only know that because of the research I've done. It doesn't shine through in the book. She does say in the Responsible Eating and Living interview, I don't want to be pounding somebody over the head with the message. I want to get them with a really good story. So initially when I had this idea of writing about this 16-year-old girl who basically eats everyone, gobbles them up like ogres in a fairy tale, it was hilarious to me. I just don't need to hear that another time. Because it's like, oh, I'm a vegan and I have this ridiculous idea about a cannibal. She didn't start off with this intention of this message, but then she didn't really seem to change the book in a way that made it more clear. I don't know. I would love to hear your thoughts on this, whether you're vegan, vegetarian, or neither. Some other perspectives would be really interesting to hear. And with that covered, that's all I have for you. I like this book as much beef as we have with each other. The final revision of this script was the third time I'd read it through, and I'm kind of going to miss reading it now that this video is all done. It's a fun read, and I recommend you pick it up yourself, even though if you've made it this far, you've just had the whole thing spoiled for you. There's a lot of content I didn't cover or go into detail on. Thank you so much for watching this far. If you did enjoy this video, please consider showing some support by liking it, or leaving a comment, or maybe even subscribing to me. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.